Finishing the race. You may wonder, what race? Well, that's a good question. Hopefully we'll figure it out together. So, as humans, we tend to drift a little bit sometimes. Maybe you have a goal, a passion, a vision, and you tend to maybe veer a little bit left, a little bit right, all right? And you may be a goal-setting person, you may not be a goal-setting person, all right? Does anybody know, based on research, how many people reach their goals? Anybody heard of statistics before? 2%? 20-something? Did you hear anything less? More? All right, it's about 8% that reach their goals, according to research. Okay, so that means that 92% of people set their wonderful goals, but they don't reach them. All right, and there's obviously various reasons for this. One statistic show that one of the main reasons why people do not reach their goals is because of lack of motivation. So in September, my family and I decided to set a goal, and that was to stop buying food that had a lot of sugar into the house. That goal lasted, I think, 0 days. And obviously, sugar is a relative term, right? But like in the first 3 ingredients, right, and really try and cut out processed food. And I think we're pretty conscious about what we eat, and we try to eat healthy and all that stuff. But I reminded my wife, what happened to, trying to not buy these things, But that's one thing. I also have a YouTube channel. One time I set a goal to have a weekly upload my YouTube channel. And if you're watching YouTube, you've tried it before, that's, sometimes easier said than done. And, some weeks I was kind of steady on it, and then it would go 6 months before I did another video. So you maybe have your goals, right, that you maybe have achieved or not. And at the end of today, I'm going to give you a pretty powerful tip, okay, on how you can reach your goals. You probably heard it before. I'm going to check my time here to make sure what time I started. All right. But again, this race, all right, that we're trying to finish. We're trying to finish this race. And if you think about as Christians, or even in general, think about like the last lap of life. Like the last lap. Whatever amount of years you want to put the last lap. But think about the last lap. Obviously, physically, that's one area where things may be more challenging. Maybe emotionally. Maybe like identity. Things you find your identity for so many years. Maybe it's changed, right? Maybe mentally. Maybe spiritually. Like you finish that last lap. You think about all the scriptures that are in the Bible are finishing, and I put 2 on here. That's a picture when I was in high school. I was trying out, but I decided to play soccer. So, but that's one of the pictures when I was. I've changed, as you can see, just a little bit. But in 2 Timothy 2, Paul says, "I fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith." And obviously that's a biblical principle, to finish, to persevere. In Hebrews 10:36, the writer says, you need to persevere, so when you're done the will of God, you'll see what he has promised. So this idea of that when you persevere as a Christian, Rob alluded to it, right? Obviously our end goal is not here. Even though America is great, or New Hampshire, or whatever country you think is the best country in the world, it is not heaven. It is yet to come what we're going to receive. And think of this goal, right? Back to this idea of goal. What's the goal of a Christian? You just think about what's the ultimate goal as a Christian? If you're to say, I think this is our goal. All right, here's a couple of scriptures I'll read. 1 Peter, and this whole letter talks a lot about this, but he says, for you receiving the end result of your faith, the salvation of your souls. So again, going back to that theme of like persevering, finishing the race strong that God has set for us. At the end of the day, that God's looking and say, good job, you good and faithful servant. Paul also writes about this in Philippians. He talks about how he wants to know the power and resurrection of Jesus Christ and becoming like him. Then in verse 12 he says, not that I've already obtained all this, or that I already arrived at my goal, but I press on, take hold on that which Jesus Christ took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forget is what is behind, and strain toward what is ahead. I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So this is this theme of like persevering, like finishing our race and attaining that goal. And of course, I think God blesses us with a lot of different goals, right? It could be marriage, it could be our kids, it could be our health, like things that, but the ultimate goal is obviously going to be one day with God, which sounds pretty wild and utopian, but it's still true. So with that, think about finishing this race and bring us to Nehemiah, because we're going to finish the book of Nehemiah. And the context here is that if you remember the book, here's a quick brief background. Nehemiah was a worker in the Persian Empire. So this is when the Jews were taken out of this land. They're taken to Persia, Babylon in captivity. The Persian king basically said, we're going to let the Jews return to Jerusalem. And Nehemiah says, I'm going to go back and help them rebuild the wall. He goes back to rebuilding the wall. There's another guy who's a scribe, so basically a teacher, Ezra. He's with Nehemiah as well. He's teaching the people. And then towards the end of the book of Nehemiah, you have Ezra the scribe working alongside Nehemiah, teaching people, and they're reading out of the book. And they're realizing, whoa, we have drifted. This is what God said, and we have drifted far off. And Nehemiah has now been gone for about 12 years. He goes back to Persia, then he returns to Jerusalem. And he realizes all this stuff is going on. And he's basically come back to say, hey, you guys have to finish this race. And it's some things he does is pretty intense. We're going to read some of it. So, in Nehemiah 13, let's start in verse 4. All right, so it reads, Nehemiah is now returning to Jerusalem. It reads, before this, Eliashib, the priest, had put in charge of the storerooms of the house of our God. He was closely associated with Tobiah, and he had provided him with a large room formerly used to store the grain offering and incense and temple articles, and also tithes of grain, new wine and olive oil prescribed for the Levites, musicians, and gatekeepers, as well as the contributions for the priest. But while all this was going on, I was not in Jerusalem. Remember, he's gone back to Persia. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had returned to the king. Sometime later, I asked his permission and came back to Jerusalem. Here I learned about the evil thing, drifting, Eliashib had done in providing Tobiah a room in the courts of the house of God. I was greatly displeased and threw all Tobiah's household goods out of the room. I gave orders to purify the rooms, and then I put back into them the equipment of the house of God with the grain offerings and the incense. So what's going on? There's three things going to realize how they've drifted. The first one is here we have the priest. If you remember, the priest, obviously, their job is to teach the people, to instruct the people, and to guide them in the law of God. And what the priest had done, he'd taken Tobiah. If you remember Tobiah, he was one of the enemies of Nehemiah early on in that book, who was trying to prevent Nehemiah from rebuilding the wall. He was opposing him. He's not taking this enemy and giving him basically where all the grains, the wine is stored in the house of God. So that's where essentially it's the money, where all the money is, okay, used to take care of the house of God. And he's now, the enemy is there. And Tobiah had married into the Jews. So he kind of has like a little bit of leeway there with, he's married in there. And Nehemiah comes back and says, whoa. The enemy has now in the storeroom. And he gives him all these directions to make sure like, no, this is not going to happen. And the priest is not doing the job. So he's actually rebuking the officials, the leaders, for not doing what they're supposed to do. So that's the first thing we see. The second thing he does is down in verse 15. So first one, the house of God is being neglected. That's one way they've drifted. Number two, all right, the Sabbath day has been violated. If you remember, Sabbath day is what to the Jews? What was Sabbath supposed to be about? Holy. What else? Rest. Okay, and not do any work. Okay, so that's a day of rest, just enjoying God, enjoying your family, enjoying sitting around the fireplace, scrolling through TikTok and Instagram. They were doing all this stuff, of course. But, sitting around just enjoying life, right? So that's the second thing. Sabbath day has been violated. And in verse 15, it reads, in those days I saw the people of Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in grain and loading on donkeys to go to wine, grapes, figs, and all the kinds of loads. And they were bringing all this into Jerusalem on the Sabbath. Therefore, I warned them against selling food on that day. People from Tyre, which is a different country, nation, who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise and selling them in Jerusalem and on the Sabbath to the people of Judah. I rebuked the nobles of Judah and said to them, what is this wicked thing you're doing, desecrating the Sabbath day? Didn't your ancestors do the same thing, so that our God brought all this calamity on us and this city? Now you're stirring more wrath against Israel by desecrating the Sabbath. We'll stop there. So, number 2, they're desecrating the Sabbath, okay? And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you know that even before they went into exile, the Jews were already starting to get kind of impatient with Sabbath. Because like, hold on, if I can work more, less and make more money, and we probably can relate to that. Like the idea of that more work equals more money. More work equals more productivity. More work equals more fill in the blank. Accomplishment, achievement. That's what I need, right, to reach my goal. I certainly relate to that. Paul, he says it too. But God says, I need to take a day just to rest. Don't work. Trust me. It's going to be okay. Even if you don't do what you think you need to be doing right now. That's what we're telling the Jews, right? And 2 commentaries I thought was interesting. One said this: the making of money and the convenience of commerce trump the worship of God. He's talking about the Jews here, but think about it in our own life, our own society. Yeah. Another commentary said mammon, which is of course like the god of money, is a powerful and relentless pursuer of worship. You just think about like the power that money can have. Not on me, by the way. I'm speaking to you guys, okay? Just making sure we're on the same page, okay? Because I can, I'm above that. But obviously I'm joking. But like money can be such a relentless pursuit of your passion and your devotion. And that's what happened here as well. And of course, they had people from Tyre, which is not Jews, to come and do commerce, not have those non-Jews, and they're all intermingling and breaking the Sabbath, which is one of the 10 Commandments. Number 3, the people are married foreign women. And in verse 23, it says, moreover, in those days I saw men of Judah who had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Half of the children spoke the language of Ashdod or the language of one of the other people, and did not know how to speak the language of Judah. And that might sound a little, is that such a big deal? If you speak 2 languages, right, if you're bilingual, a lot of people really want their kids, like, I want them to know our language. There's something by knowing the language. And once you lose the language, you can't read the scriptures because they were in Hebrew. So that's like the first step of like them not actually being able to in line what God wants them to be in line with. So it's really important that they can speak the language. Verse 25, okay, you may have to brace yourself for this verse right here. It says, I rebuked them and called curses down on them. I beat some of the men and pulled out their hair. Wow. So let me just stop for a second. So obviously, there are a couple of things. This is a different context, historically, culturally. So when the idea of pulling out their hair, there's only a couple of times in the Bible they do that, but it's a sign of grief and sorrow. It is unique to the Bible. What they tend to do when they were ashamed or a sense of like repentance or brokenness or contriteness was to tear their garments. So they walked around with torn garments, sometimes with ash on their heads, and people know like they're in torment of something. They're struggling, they're suffering, they're in anguish. So it's a way of doing that. So Ezra did the same thing to himself. If you go back to Ezra chapter 9, here Nehemiah does it to the people. So it's definitely something that's interesting, but it is a sign of showing that it's a time of mourning of where we've drifted. Reading on in middle of verse 25, you're not to give your daughters in marriage to their sons, nor are you to take their daughters in marriage for your sons or for yourself. Was it not because of marriages like these that Solomon, king of Israel, sinned? Among the many nations, there was no king like him. He was loved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. But even he, remember Solomon, who was the wisest king of all time, according to the scriptures, but even he was led into sin by foreign women. Must we hear now that you two are doing all this terrible wickedness and being unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women? So the third thing they were doing was that they were basically marrying foreign women who God had said but in Deuteronomy that they're not supposed to intermingle with the people around them because God wanted them to be set apart. And all throughout the scriptures, right, God's desire has been for the people of Judah, the Israelites, to be set apart, to be different, to not be like the people around them. And this does not mean that they were supposed to be elitist or that they're superior. No. God chose, this was his plan, he chose a people for himself. I'm going to work through you. Remember, all back to Genesis 12, he chose Abraham to be a blessing to who? All nations. You are the light on the hill. You are the people in the children of Israel how to live, how to interact, how to love, how to care, how to forgive, how to work in community. If you read through the Old Testament and the laws, 613, I think, laws there is, it's amazing when you compare those laws to the other nations at that time. Very different in terms of how sophisticated they were and how this actually is a community that will work. It is a fascinating study, if you haven't done it, to study the laws in the Old Testament and think about community, society, city, when they implement those laws. Anyways, we're called to be set apart, to be holy. And obviously, think about today, in our culture context, we don't talk about holiness. At least I have not heard that much. But God calls us to be set apart, to be different. In Leviticus 20:26, he says, you are to be holy because I am the Lord, I am holy, and I've set you apart from the nations to be my own. Jesus says in Matthew 5, you're the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses saltiness, how can it be made salty again? Peter, who obviously walked with Jesus, he said, but just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do, for it is written, be holy because I am holy. So let's do a quick macro study here. And obviously, you can do your own study. I just want to give you a little snapshot here. If you think about the church today, and not just our group here, but the church in general, right? Here we have the people that Nehemiah came back, and we see that they've drifted, right? The house of God is being neglected. They're marrying foreign women, and they're not holding the Sabbath, right? They've drifted in those ways, very, very specific ways. If you think about the church today in general, where is the church? And again, this is just some research. Obviously, when you do research, it's a sample group, right? Professor Ross can tell us more about how you do research. Again, it's at least gives an indicator where things may be, right? So this is done by the Barna Group. I've shared some research that they've done before. And they did research on a worldview among Christians in America, okay? It says, Barna's new research found strong agreement with ideas unique to non-biblical worldviews among practicing Christians. So basically, based on the sample study, only 17% of Christians will consider their faith important and attend church regularly actually have a biblical worldview. So that means that out of the people that were in that sample, only 17% had a biblical worldview. And what does that mean, biblical worldview? That means that, you believe in the scriptures, right? And you're trying to align your life in accordance with the scriptures and teaching of Jesus. That's a biblical worldview. All right, the other worldview could be new spirituality, postmodernism, which today we're actually not in postmodernism. Everyone know what it's called today? It's like postmodernism. I forget, but we're actually past postmodernism. But the whole idea of postmodernism is that reality is subjective. So you make your own reality, whatever it fits for you. That's your reality. Those are Marxism and secularism. All right, I'm not going to read this one. Here it says, for the purpose of research, a biblical worldview, that's what they defined it as, is people that view Jesus Christ to live the sinless life. God is all-powerful and all-knowing creator of the universe. He still rules today. Salvation is a gift from God and cannot be earned. Satan is real. A Christian has a responsibility to share their faith in Christ with other people. The Bible is accurate in all of his teachings. So that's the worldview that's the parameters that they used. And only 17% had a worldview that was in line with that attended church. This is another guy, he wrote a book, and I thought that was interesting. So he said, the second bullet point there, television has greater power over the lives of most Americans than any educational system or government or church. It is the control center of most homes, more ubiquitous, thank you, and more control than Orwell's Big Brother. Think about that. We know Americans watch about 8 hours a day of television, roughly, on average. All right, maybe it's less, maybe it's more. And if you think of little children, right, watching television, and we know that the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, so they see things and it actually goes directly in the subconscious mind. Disney, Hollywood, fashion, what's in, what's out, what's important, what you pursue, marketing. Think about marketing companies, how much money they spend to convey and to persuade us of something we should think a certain way, right? So obviously, you can agree, you can disagree, but we, in general, there's of course, call them forces or call them just influences that are influencing us, whether we consciously think about that or we don't think about it at all, right? So that's like just on the macro level. Okay, let's go down to the micro level, all right? And at the micro level, which would be our group, like our fellowship, and if Nehemiah came, or Jesus, all right, here's one thought, okay? So I got 3 questions to consider. And you can, after asking 3 questions, you can probably figure out what Bible verse is based on. All right, is God number one in your life? Truly, like, is God the most important in your life? Do you love him with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength? Is he still number one? Is that a song? Is he still number one? I think a song came to mind. Number 2, are you loving yourself? Taking care of yourself, spending time with God, feeding yourself in every aspect, holistically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. Are you loving yourself? Are you loving strangers, your neighbor, people you come in contact with? Someone prayed about the election, right? Are you loving the Republican? Can you love the Democrat? But that's real, right? And obviously this is based on the greatest commandment. To love the God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you just start there, just take a little pulse check. Right. Like, where is God in my life? And for some of us, we've been Christians for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Maybe some people are yet trying to figure out Christianity. But to persevere in that love for God, to continue to love God and to find joy in that. And if you go back to Nehemiah, right? So he's been gone for 12 years. He comes back to Jerusalem. He realized people have drifted again. It looks like they may not finish that race strong. I can imagine that for Nehemiah, it maybe would have been easy to feel, excuse me, is this all in vain? Like, I came back, he risked his life. He left Persia from a pretty comfortable job, right? Working with the king as a cupbearer and coming back and seeing all this stuff. People drifting. But Nehemiah is an amazing example of someone who really cared about God. It wasn't about him. If you think about it, he put his life on risk, his reputation on risk to really help God's people. And when we look at the things that his prayer, which is just remember me. He prays it 3 times. Remember me, remember me, remember me. And I wonder, what was it about Nehemiah that he had such a zealous passion to keep doing this, to come back and he was, scholars are speculating that he was really quite old at this time when he's coming back. Maybe 50s, maybe he's in the 60s. And there was physical labor that he was doing as well. I'm sorry. He was in his prime when he came back, okay? He was in scholars, I'm scoot back, okay? Scholars believe he was in his prime when he came back, okay? In his 50s, in his 60s, the height of his life where, he's mature, he's mature in his identity, and he's still strong and vibrant, right? He came back. But what was his why? And he was so wise because he was in his prime. What was Nehemiah's why? Right? To keep working, keep doing this and not giving up. I think for us too, our faith is obviously it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? Yeah. So even to consider what is your why for finishing the race strong? And if you're into the whole personal development space, kind of motivational speakers, they all talk about this. Simon Sinek, he has a whole book on this. To know your why, which is so important. So he went back to goal. I told him to give you a tip that's really powerful. So if you have any goal, right? Say if it's finish strong as a Christian or whatever it might be, do you know your why? Because when you pursue a new goal, you might say, whoa, we're going somewhere we haven't been before. It's easy to give up. It's a lot easier to give up. Maybe 92% of people, roughly, according to research, do not attain their goal. They give up because of lack of motivation. But if you have a strong why, or strong enough, you will reach your goal. And think about Nehemiah's goal. Think about your goal. I want to think about a goal as a Christian, right? That drives you. There was another writer, he wrote this. The problem with God is that it tells people how to live. And people don't like to be told. Yeah, true. I thought that's kind of true. Like, we like to be independent, right? We don't like to be told. Think about like little kids. Like my kids, they're not here. Can you clean up they don't like to be told, right? There's something in us. We want to be independent and have our freedom. And there's probably truth in that. People don't like to be told, right? They want to do what they want to do. But here's the cool thing. Even Rob shared about it. The world has its answer, whatever that may be. Status, socioeconomic status, pursuing money, accomplishments. And it gives you something. But if whatever you're pursuing didn't create your heart, that thing by definition cannot fill your heart. Because he didn't design your heart. God designed our hearts. Right. He knows what fills our hearts. And yes, I would love a sports car. Maybe not the Celica, even though I know exactly what this. Maybe I'd take a Toyota Supra if we stay in the Toyota. Okay, I would love a Toyota Supra. All right, if it's supercharged. Okay, but this is a little off. But anyways, I would love a sports car, right? I'm sure it would give me joy. I'm not saying a sports car is bad, but would it completely fill my heart and give me what my heart truly desires? One of my favorite scriptures, okay, I want you to think about this, okay? It says Romans 12. When you think about this, why? Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to understand what's God's will. His good, his pleasing, and perfect will. God's will for your life, once you transform, right? You don't conform and drift, but you transform and align with yourself with God's. And remember, it's like you have to taste the food to know what it tastes like. Yeah. It's the same principle. You have to do what God is telling you to do to know this will that is good, that is pleasing, that is perfect. You have to do it, and then you'll realize it. That's God's desire for your life. Here and now, I believe, and more so to the age to come. Amen. So I hope that we can all be reminded God's desire for your life is good and is pleasing, is perfect. And if you don't feel like that, it doesn't mean it's not true. Right. And there could be things you're working through. Maybe you need some help, some guidance, some sharing, some vulnerability, right, to work through stuff. But God is in the process of healing and transforming and empowering and giving you what you truly, truly desire. So as you take communion, think about like, what was Jesus' why for going through what he went through? And in Hebrews 12, it says this about us and Jesus. It says, therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and that sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. So consider him, it says. And I believe what it says, for the joy set before him. I don't know exactly what all that entails, but I do believe for sure that it also involves you. When he went through that horror, he was thinking for the joy. One day people would respond to his sacrifice. People would respond And through that, there will be a ripple effect. And that was his intention all the time, to bless people through people and to show God's love through people. So with that, we're going to pray for our communion. And you should have received a little cup. If you haven't, there are some cups in the back. We're going to pray for communion. So we're going to pray. And after that, we have a couple announcements before we have our final song today.